Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Darren Mell, and I am the chair of the Constitution Party of Minnesota. I have my guest, Andrea Cuellar. She is the Director of Education Policy, as well as Chair of Sherburne County and Chair of CD6. We also have Samuel Crow, who is our Secretary of the Constitution Party. Today's agenda is we're going to define what a Republic Review is. And we're going to explain the amendments 9, 10, and 16. We're also going to discuss individualism and collectivism to really give you a lens and awareness of how of the sophistry that is used to take away our freedoms. So Andrea's got quite a presentation for you today, and then we'll have some Q&A afterwards. And so with that said, I'd like to give the stage to Andrea. And Andrea, go ahead. Share with us your presentation today.
Quite the build-up. I don't know how well of a job I'll do. I had spoken to G.R. Mobley, who came up with the concept of Republic Review about 2 years ago now, or a little over 2 years ago. And not his real name, but he goes by G.R. Mobley. You can find his YouTube videos online. And to talk to GR, and I know Darren you have, is to listen and take notes, because I know whenever we were on the phone, I was taking these notes as fast as I could as he was talking and trying to download as much information into me as he could.
Yeah, so, and if people do go to his website, we'll add that to the show notes.
Okay.
That he is a constitutional expert, and he's been doing a lot of work. He's been on several shows. Just a great source of information. I spent almost 8 hours with him, and
just amazing.
Talking Constitution, just amazing. Yep.
Amazing. And so I wanted to start off this town hall, if you will, with a clip from Ayn Rand. It's a 1 minute 45 second, and that'll kind of give us the mindset I think we need going into this as we discuss Republic Review. We will show a quick Republic Review video too that'll better explain, and then I'll get into dissecting some of the concepts that GR had brought up in a 2-hour presentation that he gave that I took notes on, so that we can explore any lingering questions that you might have after watching the Republic Review 6-minute video. And then we can have a discussion on that, because I know there are questions. And so a friend of mine had mentioned, what's the difference between Republic Review and Convention of States? And so we will get into that, and why Convention of States is not the answer and Republic Review is, and what it is and what it is not. And so I will go ahead and share my screen, and we'll start off with the Ayn Rand video.
I think that you will agree with me when I say that you do not have a good deal of respect for the society in which you and I currently live. You think that we're going downhill fairly fast. Now, I would like you to think about this question, and you'll have a minute intermission to ponder it, and then come back and answer it. Do you predict dictatorship and economic disaster for the United States if we continue on our present course? Do you? And we'll get Ayn Rand's answer in just a moment. And now back to our story. All right, Ayn Rand, what I'd like to know is this. Since you describe it as happening in your novel Atlas Shrugged, do you actually predict dictatorship and economic disaster for the United States?
If the present collectivist trend continues, if the present anti-reason philosophy continues, yes. That is the way the country is going. But I do not believe in historical determinism, and I do not believe that people have to go that way. Men have the free will to choose and to think. If they change their thinking, we do not have to go into dictatorship.
Yes, but how can you expect to reverse this trend when, as we've said, the country is run by majority rule through ballot, and that majority seems to prefer to vote for this modified welfare state?
Oh, I don't believe that. You know as well as I do that the majority today has no choice.
What do you mean?
The majority has never been offered a choice between controls and freedom.
How do you account for the fact that an almost overwhelming majority of the people who are regarded as our leading intellectuals and Our leading industrialists, the men whom you seem to admire the most, the men with the muscle and the money, favor the modified capitalism that we have today.
Because it is an intellectual issue. Since they all believe in collectivism, they do favor it. But the majority of the people has never been given a choice. You know that both parties today are for socialism, in effect, for controls, and there is no party. There are no voices to offer an actual pro-capitalist, laissez-faire economic freedom and individualism. That is what this country needs today.
Isn't it possible that we all believe in it because we are all basically lonely people and we all understand that we are basically our brother's keepers?
You couldn't say that you really understand it because there is no way in which you could justify it. Nobody has ever given a reason why men should be their brother's keepers, and you've had every example, and you see the examples around you of men perishing by the attempt to be their brother's keepers.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing. And so I wanted to open with that because at the root of our problem in our country today, it boils down to individualism versus collectivism. And the third video we'll watch today will be about oh, sorry. I got to stop sharing that screen.
Webinar titled Time to Revive Individualism. Steve.
I apologize.
much,
Let me
Jason.
stop this video. Okay. So we'll take that one off and get ready for the next one. Some things I wanted to point out from the Ayn Rand video. She spoke about the two parties preferring socialism, and that's something we definitely see today. Dictatorship and economic disaster is what she warned. And folks, this is where we're at. And that was made in, I believe, the 50s, early 50s, if memory serves correctly, that video that we watched with Ayn Rand and Chris Wallace's father, Mike. So she said, but we're headed for a dictatorship and economic disaster. And we are here now. We've been in a dictatorship for quite some time, for decades. It's just gotten progressively worse, and those that have eyes to see can see it clearly now. And those that will their tyrannical powers are willing to show their true colors now more than ever, being that they're the majority in government. And many in government don't see it because they've been born into the system. And many of we the people, plebeians, don't see it because we've been born into the system of slavery, if you will, of our rights being violated, of our property being taken, of the way we earn our daily bread being interfered with by big daddy government. We have been born into the system, and it's been normalized. And my fear, and I was speaking to a friend last night, my fear is that this new generation of children that are in schools being inculcated yet again through this Prussian model of education, that this is normal. Like, it's okay for the government to tell you when you can and cannot work. And the government has complete control over how you spend your money, where you spend your money, and can take your money, your property, and that these children will think that that's okay. We've grown up, Darren, I believe you and I are the same age, and Sam, you're a little younger, but I think you realize this as well, that we've grown up with these similar lies that we've been told and sold in schools and by those in authority that have been lied to as well and believe it. And there are some that actually do know that this is criminal behavior on the part of our leaders and those that have been elected. There are some that do know and don't care because it's just the status quo. And so Ayn Rand is a hard-ass hero to me, not because she's an atheist, that I cannot agree with, but the truth that she speaks in terms of where our country was headed back then and where we are today where we are today lends credence to what she had said back then. So she knew that usurping the rights of we the people and usurping the rights of the individual, who is the truest minority, is the individual, will lead to tyrannical control. And this is where we are today. And so she also mentioned that both sides prefer socialism, and that is true. My 26-year-old son just told me yesterday or the day before, he's like, did you realize that the Empire State Building was built in 12 months? And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, that's not true. And he goes, well, there wasn't as much regulation. So it was built quickly, and it's still standing today, and there's upkeep and all of that. And I thought that was interesting. And so he and I had a discussion about the amount of regulation and bureaucracy and the government oversight constantly growing and growing and growing into this Leviathan. And so both parties prefer socialism. We see that with the Republican Party. We see that with the Democratic Party. I know we're a part of the Constitution Party. I really firmly don't understand why we even have a party system. It should be about the Constitution. It should be about preserving freedom. That's it. That's it. Because once you get into Republican Party, Democrat Party, you're getting into a sports mindset and a team mindset instead of preserving individual liberty and freedom. I don't care who you are, where you are, your orientation. You leave me alone, I leave you alone. Your rights end where mine begin, and vice versa. And let's make sure that we are preserving individual liberty and freedom. I think that's the only way you can really grow as a human being and as a son and daughter of our Heavenly Father. I was listening to a Lex Friedman podcast in which he was interviewing Jordan Peterson, and Jordan Peterson was stating how love and truth and seeking those things is so important to live a full life. And I just don't see how the current state of affairs today lends itself to the individual being able to seek truth, to pursue love, to pursue that transformation into a son and daughter of our Heavenly Father, when there's such top-down reins prohibiting us from growing. You cannot grow in a communist Marxist society filled with lies and fear mongering. You cannot grow. And I think that's the ultimate goal, is to keep us from that, to keep us from growing. And that is just denying those blessings around you. I am blessed when I have my fellow brothers and sisters pursue truth and love and growth, because I get to witness their hero's journey, which inspires my own. And I really believe that that's what Mike Wallace was trying to trip Ayn Rand up with. The third point I wanted to bring up, which was, aren't we supposed to be our brother's keeper? Yeah, we are.
Supposed to be voluntary, right?
Yes, voluntary, Sam. And also Ayn Rand would say, and she has said multiple times in other interviews, absolutely not. She's a total objectivist, an atheist to the core. She was absolutely not. But I posit, yes, we are, in terms that I can look at, let's say, Darren, for instance, and how he's changed his life and how he's pursued his goal of learning about love and truth and self-awareness and personal progress. And I could look at his journey and be inspired by that. And in that way, he's being my keeper by being my example. And I think living in that way, we are being our brother's keeper. But it's not right, Sam. You're right. It's not a matter of how did you phrase that, Sam?
I said it's supposed to be voluntary.
Yep, it's not imposed tyrannically.
And I would add to that your brother's keeper. It's we love our neighbors, is what I would say. Love your neighbor as yourself. And charity, which is love, is given. It's not taken. And if you have the government in socialism, it takes from the people to give to others.
Right.
And taxation. So it's impossible to be charitable through socialism.
Yeah, it is. It's theft of property.
Yeah, to vote that someone's property will be taken and given to someone else so that they can be, have their needs met. That is tyranny. That's not freedom. And so if you look at, what is your brother's keeper, loving your neighbor, it's, take church-run hospitals or church-run orphanages, or church-run
Church.
schools,
Yep.
you know, charity out of the abundance of freedom to take care of those who are less fortunate, to give them a hand up.
From a free market
From a
society.
free market approach.
Yep.
That freedom breeds more freedom and actually lifts everybody up.
And
Out of
unfortunately, free
generosity.
market and capitalism has been equated with crony capitalism, which isn't laissez-faire capitalism.
Yep.
It's mafia. So there's a difference.
And
Yep.
so, Andrea, you know, you've introduced the objectivism of Rand, and how does this tie into the Republic Review and
Sure.
the amendments?
Sure. So as I was speaking to GR, he mentioned, and he knew I am a teacher, and he said, and it had really opened my eyes at that point. I really didn't think about it. I've been brainwashed to think that this was legal and lawful, or rather lawful. It's legal, but it doesn't mean it's lawful. So it's unlawful to have a Department of Education. And when GR told me that, I was dumbfounded. And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, it's unlawful. It was never passed through legislation. It was never ratified. It was just created. The same with HUD, the same with the Department of Transportation. And he listed off all of these government created programs, departments, bureaucracies that were created without we the people's consent, without that legislation. Like a process.
Mhm.
And so that got me down a rabbit hole, and studying a lot of what he was talking about. And Republic Review is about reclaiming the Republic. It's about auditing our Constitution. We look at our Constitution and we see where we have erred and where decisions have been made that are unlawful, because the Constitution is a compact and it's a charter. It's a contract between the states and the federal government, representing we the people. And
Yeah.
so he is.
And if
Go
I
ahead.
may, I want to add that the review is not as much as reviewing the Constitution as is reviewing what we're doing against
Yes.
the Constitution.
Yes.
The Constitution, we believe, is a good document. We've named our party after that.
Yep.
And that is the law of the land. And so when you create a Department of Education without any legislation, without the consent of the people, and it just becomes a department by decree, that is unconstitutional, it's unlawful.
Yes.
And so just speaking it into existence without tying that to our Constitution is just that's what we're reviewing. So what are those things that have been done against the Constitution, against what would be lawful, and auditing it? And so you say, this is what the Constitution has, says this is what we have, and you put the two together and your audit comes out with the gaps. Well,
Yep.
these are all the things that are gapped that don't fit in the constitutional model.
Not only that don't fit, that are unlawful. And so in my research and going through a lot of GR's videos, and then trying to source out and check the veracity of his statements, the first time this precedence was set for our government to usurp and function outside of constitutionality and unlawfully was when they created it. I believe it was 1849, checking my notes, so I apologize as I'm looking away. 1849, the federal government successfully created an unconstitutional department called the Department of the Interior. And so that was created in response to 1829, in which the president stepped out of bounds and persecuted people in the Trail of Tears. So you had the Trail of Tears happen, and then remedied that through 1849, creating the Department of the Interior. So you're having an unlawful response to another unlawful response, and it's just snowballed into bigger and bigger and bigger government. GR rightly points out that we tend to have our pet projects in terms of those running for office. so you have those like for healthcare, your platforms, if you will. And so those that are going to run on, healthcare for everybody, or, changing education. And so all of these things, while well and good and much needed to look at and review and discuss, are not going to correct the Leviathan that has been created from the very nexus, which would be the unlawful federal government decisions that are acting outside the purview of our Constitution. And so now I'd like to show, or actually I'd like to quote GR and then show a video on a succinct explanation of Republic Review. And so GR Mobley had stated, my plan is 1, simple, 2, constitutional, and 3, aligns with James Madison and the framers during the ratification debates. In a nutshell, our intent is a call for a convention to audit the federal government against the Constitution. What I refer to as, sorry, I can't read my own handwriting, as which is what I referred to before as a Republic Review. This Republic Review is not a convention to rewrite or amend the Constitution, but rather an instrument to reel back the federal government to its intended function and limited scope as the framers initially intended and envisioned. Yes.
And, just this is a good spot to say about the Constitutional Convention, because we've mentioned it a couple times. The Constitutional Convention is where the states can come together and modify the Constitution, right? That's how we get the additional amendments. Yep. And as a party, the Constitution Party of Minnesota, as well as the National Party, we oppose any attempt to call for a constitutional convention for any purpose whatsoever, because it cannot be limited to a single issue. And in the present state, the convention could seriously erode our constitutionally protected unalienable rights.
Absolutely.
So it's like the Constitution doesn't need to be fixed. What we've done since we've had the Constitution and how we've abused the law, that's the Republic Review. That's what we need to do. We don't need a convention.
Right. We cannot treat the Constitution like we do disease and pharmacology with big pharma. We're throwing a bunch of pills at it, the pills being more amendments, instead of getting to the root of the issue is what's making you sick? What is making our country sick? The unlawful measures taken by our so-called anointed elected, working outside of the charter, outside of the Constitution. So the Convention of States, while sounds well and good, I believe too, it requires, for the Convention of States, requires an Article 5 process to kind of like beg daddy government to go and complain. You don't need that. We already have the states. We're a federalist government. The states are the ones that are in contract with the federal government. We are the ones, the states, sovereigns are the ones, they don't need to appeal to say, hey, cry foul, time out. You guys are not obeying this Constitution. You're working outside the contract. No, you don't need to appeal to that. They're breaking the contract. So Republic Review would convene the states to say, what is unlawful that's currently happening in our country in terms of the federal government usurping its authority? Let's look and see where they have erred. And we need to reel this country, the federal government, back in place. We need to put it in check. Whereas the Constitution Convention is going to open the door to more amendments. It's a Faustian bargain, because on one hand, well, it's convening people, it's gaining traction, but it's opening the door to these globalists coming in there with their own agenda. And a lot of people want to take the expedient route and shortcut to eliminating some discomfort, instead of taking the long view of the right thing to do is to put your government back in check and make sure they're adhering to the charter, the Constitution. We need to audit. And so let's work from that purview and then move forward with anything else after that. And so now I will show and share my screen and show the second video, Reclaiming the Republic. Okay, can you see?
Yep.
Okay,
While
It's coming
revolting
up.
against the despotic rule of Britain, the 13 independent and sovereign states formed a confederacy republic. By the grace of God, this confederacy got us through the Revolutionary War victorious. However, it had some inadequacies. The Confederacy was about to default on its debts because it did not have the power to directly tax the states who were not paying their war debts. So, the Continental Congress and the states agreed to send delegates to the Constitutional Convention to have the Articles of Confederation fixed. The result of that convention was the Constitution, written by men who were inspired by the divine hand of Providence. By design, the Constitution was a compact that was written for and by the states to create a new general government and delegate to this government very limited and defined roles, responsibilities, and powers. The general government was the supreme authority over those few roles, responsibilities, and powers that the states delegated to it. However, the states were the supreme authority over all the roles, responsibilities, and powers not delegated to the general government. The only way the general government could obtain a new role, responsibility, or power was through the amendment process found in the Constitution. Before an amendment can become part of the Constitution, it requires 3/4 of the states to approve the amendment. Thus, the states are the final arbiters over the Constitution. During the ratification process, each state debated whether they should keep the Constitution as their new form of government. The delegates who represented the state at the Constitutional Convention testified the definitions and clarified the Constitution during the state ratification conventions. These testimonies were written down and were the literal terms, conditions, and definitions of the Constitution. These testimonies clarified and defined the supremacy, necessary and proper, commerce, and general welfare clauses were limited to delegated or enumerated powers. To be clear, all states did not trust a government with general powers, so they made sure that this new general government would be restrained to only the delegated powers by enumerating them in Article 1, Section 8. More importantly, after ratifying the Constitution, all the states demanded an amendment that asserted that all powers not delegated to the federal government were reserved to the states and the people. The result of their demand was the insertion of the 9th and 10th Amendments. The Constitution allowed for new states to join the Republic with equal sovereignty and equal powers. This equality was referred to as the Equal Footing Doctrine. To support this equal footing doctrine, 3 new states joined the Republic within 7 years with equal footing to the original 13 states. There was no amendment to the Constitution to change the equal footing doctrine, and changing how states would join the Union would also violate the Uniformity Clause in Article 1, Section 8, subsection 1. One reason why the people lost the understanding of the limited nature of the Constitution and the constraints on the federal government was because the new states joining the Union did not get copies of the ratification debates, which were the testified definitions and clarifications of the Constitution. So these terms and definitions were forgotten. The framers were aware of the corruptibility of men, so in the Constitution they required all public servants to swear or affirm by oath that they would support the Constitution. Therefore, another problem was the deterioration of the morals in America. Politicians, judges, lawyers, and others began self-aggrandizing the general government's roles, responsibilities, and powers, and began centralizing more powers in the federal government, contrary to how the Constitution was defined. Over the years, the general government granted to itself roles, responsibilities, and powers by using the general welfare and defense, commerce, necessary and proper, and supremacy clauses in ways that violated how these clauses were clarified and defined to the states at the time of ratification. Consequently, the contract was, and even today is, still being violated, broken, and ignored. What do you do when a contract or compact is being violated and there is no formal court that has authority over these matters? You have to go to those who have the authority over the matters involved. In this case, it would be the states collectively, because all things not delegated to the Constitution, like healthcare, marriage, housing, and so much more, are reserved to the states to decide. Because the Constitution is a compact, the process to identify all discrepancies within the compact would be an audit. This is why the states must audit their compact by comparing the current activities of the general government with those that the Constitution grants to them and identify where the general government has overstepped its bounds and violated the terms of the state's compact. Once the states have identified all the roles, responsibilities, and powers that the general government is exercising in violation to the Constitution, then the states would have to require the general government to cease and dissolve all unconstitutional roles, responsibilities, and powers. This entire review and reconciliation process is referred to as Republic Review. Republic Review is when states unite in asserting their authority over their compact and use the powers in the Constitution to get the general government back on the path of compliance with the Constitution.
Okay, so stop sharing. So any thoughts, considerations about that one?
Yeah, that describes, that's Mobley's presentation.
Yeah.
And it describes how the states are sovereign over the contract that,
Right.
And I just got to point out that the call to bring everybody together was because the Southern Compact, or the Compact of States before, wasn't sufficient. So they're going to try to fix that. And they just threw it away and started over, which is, the risk of why we don't want a constitution convention.
Right.
Because
Yes.
last time when things were really bad, they just threw it away and started over.
Yep. Yep.
And when we're at, 50, 49, 51% that could go, collective on us.
Yes.
That's a real threat. And so,
Right.
I think holding to what GR is saying with a Republic Review, in my day job, I used to do auditing for information security,
Okay.
So I understand you have your controls. Our control set is the Constitution.
Yep.
And then you go and audit and look at what people are doing and you test it against your controls, and it's just a gap. And
Yeah.
the picture of the way they animated that with the eagle and all the different branches of
Yep.
unconstitutional departments, Department of Agriculture, Department of Education.
There's so many more feathers to that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many feathers to that, and it's not constitutional. And so those powers are reserved to the states.
Yep.
And I think if the states came together and said, we're auditing it and we're going to decide that, like it was saying, the states put out there saying, look, we've decided that you have to dismantle the Department of Education immediately.
Yep.
And Department of
But
Agriculture.
why? Why do that? It's going to put so many people out of government jobs. Why would we do that? It's been done for so many years. It's just what we've done. Why would we do that?
To bring back freedoms, because we
Right.
know that as the government grows, it becomes tyrannical and overstepping its authority.
Yep.
And so, a federal Department of Education, for example, is an anathema
Yep.
to states' rights to educate the people.
Absolutely.
And we don't need a central federal government dictating to the states how they'll do education. The Constitution is clear. That is not the power of the federal government. And so, that's a go-to example. And you're also our director of education policy. So I'm keeping it, directed towards that. And I think it's the right thing to do. And rather than throwing away the Constitution, because this is a means by which to preserve that which we believe is good.
Right.
The Constitution is good. And also, I think I want to point out that a part of the video is the ratification definitions and the debates, so that people understand what what went into the writing of the Constitution. You know,
Yeah,
it's like the dictionary and the spirit behind it.
right.
I know our enemies of the Constitution say that it's a living document, you
It is
know,
not.
and it changes with the time.
No, and that's what a Constitution Convention is going to open the door to, is people with thoughts like that are going to go in there with their own personal agenda to dismantle the Constitution. I'm sure globalists and collectivists on that side of the fence would welcome a convention. Oh, sure. You want your convention? I'll be there. I'll be there and we'll change things. And that's not what you do. You don't create more problems trying to fix a problem. You look at that problem and you say, what's the genesis of this problem? How did we get here? We got here by unlawful measures taken by our federal government against we the people. And we got here because of cowards that have been elected and put into office that outright refuse to call foul and to say this is unlawful and it needs to stop.
Yeah,
Now,
and there's twofold on that. It's not just the cowards, it's also the people who take bribes and are power hungry
yes,
and step
yes,
in and are doing it for personal gain.
Or
You know, the
both.
video did mention, what was that, Sam?
Or
or
both.
both.
Or both. Yeah, no, and the video did mention how men typically their character devolves rather than evolves. And
Yeah,
that and so to who was it that said, you have a republic if you can keep it? Was that Benjamin Franklin?
Benjamin Franklin.
Yes,
Yeah.
said it 3 times.
Mhm.
And then it's that the Constitution is wholly inept except for a righteous people, or without a righteous people, the documents are wholly inept, because you have to hold up the virtues of believing in a creator and inalienable rights, and that everything hangs on the framework of inalienable rights and limited government. That a lot of people might not know that a republic means run by the people.
Yep. Yep.
Democracy is a bad
mob rule.
example. Yeah,
It's
that's
majority
mob
rule, which means minority is mobbed by the majority. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we're going to watch that in the last video that we'll show here of the types of government and the sophistry of words, and how the powers that be have been pinning people against each other by semantics. Because
Yeah.
ultimately it's about individualism and tribalism. Tribalism is the same as collectivism. It's about creating tribes to devolve order into chaos. And we are there today. Now, GR had, to my understanding, for several years, I helped him last year email every legislator in Minnesota and definitely in North Dakota, because I helped them collect the emails from the House and Senate of North Dakota, gave him all the emails and phone numbers. And he sent out an email to all, I don't know if it was all 50 states, but it was definitely Minnesota and North Dakota, about Republic Review, about the concerns that we're discussing here, and about the process of Republic Review and how to audit. And he submitted and supplicated that they do this. And I resubmitted that Republic Review video to our current running for governor, Scott Jensen. I want to see people actually serve we the people, and that means bringing us back to law and order. We are not like we are a banana republic right now, and it's only going to get worse. And it's definitely been stoked on the side of getting worse through the education system. I've worked in it. I see how it's run. I've job hopped on purpose, and I've had people say, why do you quit so much? You know what? I don't have to put up with what I don't have to put up with. And there's some things that you do need to quit. And as I've quit and served in various capacities at these various schools across Minnesota, inner city, suburb, low socioeconomic, high socioeconomic, it's all the same brainwashing of the masses. And I really believe it's by design, and it's been by design for decades, to numb the minds of the masses to abdicate their personal responsibility and give that role to the government to take care of them.
And
That
to
is
make them ignorant of the Constitution and
Absolutely.
of our rights as individuals under our Constitution, our
Right.
and our freedoms. So
I've got
you
a few
wanted,
extra copies in case you need one.
oh yeah,
Nice, Sam.
if anybody wants a copy of the Constitution, our party will send you one.
Yes.
So Andrea, why don't you go ahead with the next video then?
Okay, so here is the next video, and it's government systems. Let's see if I can get to it here. How did I do that? Stop share. You might have to walk me through this. That wasn't the last video. How do I shrink this?
Just minimize the window, don't you?
Hit escape. Hit escape. No, go back to your YouTube and then hit escape. Go back to YouTube, hit escape.
I can't go back to YouTube. Sorry, I'm giving you this to deal with.
No problem.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Here we go. The American form of government.
When Benjamin Franklin exited the Constitutional Convention, he was asked by a woman, "Sir, what have you given us?" His immediate response was, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." Yet most Americans today have been persuaded that our nation's governmental system is a democracy and not a republic. The difference between these two is essential in understanding Americanism and the American system. Before we discuss political systems, however, it's helpful to address the confusion that has been spread about the political spectrum. Many have been led to believe that the political spectrum places groups such as communists on the far left, fascists or dictators on the far right, and political moderates or centrists in the middle. However, a more accurate political spectrum will show government having zero power on the far right to having 100% power on the far left. At the extreme right, there is no government. The extreme left features total government under such labels as communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism, princes, potentates, dictators, kings, any form of total government. Those who claim that Nazis and fascists are right-wing never define their terms. This amounts to spreading confusion. Toward the middle of the political spectrum can be found the type of government limited to its proper role of protecting the rights of the people. That's where the Constitution of the United States is. Those who advocate such a form of government are really constitutional moderates. So let's analyze the basic forms of government. They are monarchy or dictatorship ruled by one, oligarchy ruled by a few, democracy ruled by a majority, republic ruled by law, and anarchy, which is ruled by no one. In discussing these five, we'll see that they can be narrowed down to even fewer. Looking first at monarchy or dictatorship, this form of government doesn't really exist in the practical sense. It's always a group that puts one of its members up front. A king has his council of nobles or earls, and every dictator has his bureaucrats or commissars, the men behind the scenes. This isn't ruled by one, even though one person may be the visible leader. It's ruled by a group. So let's eliminate monarchy, dictatorship, because it never truly exists. Oligarchy, which is ruled by a group, is the most common form of government in all history. And it is the most common form of government today. Most of the nations of the world are ruled by a powerful few, and therefore oligarchy remains. At the other end, we find anarchy, which means without government. Some people have looked over history and found that many of its worst crimes were committed by governments. So they decided that having no government might be a good idea. But this is a mistake, because as the ancient Greeks stated, without law there can be no freedom. Our founding fathers agreed and held that some amount of government is a necessary force in any civilized, orderly society. In a state of anarchy, however, everyone has to guard life, liberty, and property, and the lives of family members. Everyone must be armed, and movement is severely restricted because one's property has to be protected at all times. Civilized people have always hired someone to do the guarding, a sheriff, a police force, or some branch of government. Once law enforcement was in place, the people were freer. They could leave their property, work in the fields, and so on. In short, the proper amount of government makes everyone freer. There are some who advocate anarchy, however, not because they want no government, but because they don't like what they have. They use anarchy as a tool for revolutionary change. The condition of anarchy is very much like a vacuum where something rushes in to fill it. These calculating anarchists work to break down the existing government with rioting, killing, looting, and terrorism. Tragically, the people living in such chaos often go to those best able to put an end to it and beg them to take over and restore order. And who is best able to put an end to the chaos? The very people who started it. The anarchists who created the problem then create a government run by them, an oligarchy, where they have total power. This is exactly what happened in Russia that led to Lenin taking total power, and in Germany, where Hitler's brown shirts created the chaos that brought him to power. But anarchy isn't a stable form of government. It's a quick transition from something that exists to something desired by the power-hungry. It's a temporary condition, and because it isn't permanent, we eliminate it as well. The word democracy comes from two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and kratein, meaning to rule. Democracy, therefore, means the rule of the people, majority rule. This, of course, sounds good, but suppose the majority decides to take away one's home, or business, or children. Obviously, there has to be a limit. The flaw in democracy is that the majority isn't restrained. If more than half the people can be persuaded to want something in a democracy, they rule. What about republic? Well, that comes from the Latin, res meaning thing, and publica meaning public. It means the public thing, the law. A true republic is one where the government is limited by law, leaving the people alone. America's founders had a clean slate to write on. They could have set up an oligarchy. In fact, there were some who wanted George Washington to be their king. But the founding fathers knew history, and they chose to give us the rule of law in a republic, not the rule of a majority in a democracy. Why? Let's demonstrate the difference in the setting of the Old West. Consider a lynch mob in a democracy. 35 horseback riders chase one lone gunman. They catch him, and they vote 35-1 to hang him. Democracy has triumphed, and there's one less gunman to contend with. Now consider the same scenario in a republic. The 35 horseback riders catch the gunman and vote 35-1 to hang him, but the sheriff arrives, and he says, "You can't kill him. He's got his right to a fair trial." So they take the gunman back to town. A jury of his peers is selected, and they hear the evidence and the defense, and they decide if he shall hang. Does the jury even decide by majority rule? No, it has to be unanimous or he goes free. The rights of the government aren't subject to majority rule, but to the law. This is the essence of a republic. Many Americans would be surprised to learn that the word democracy does not appear in the Declaration of Independence or the U.S. Constitution, nor does it appear in any of the constitutions of the 50 states. The founders did everything they could to keep us from having a democracy. James Madison, rightly known as the father of the Constitution, wrote in essay number 10 of the Federalist Papers, "Democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths." Alexander Hamilton agreed, and he stated, "We are a republican government. Real liberty is never found in despotism or in the extremes of democracy." Samuel Adams, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, stated, "Democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself." The founders had good reason to look upon democracy with contempt, because they knew that the democracies in the early Greek city-states produced some of the wildest excesses of government imaginable. In every case, they ended up with mob rule, then anarchy, and finally tyranny under an oligarchy. During that period in Greece, there was a man named Solon, who urged creation of a fixed body of law not subject to majority whims. But where the Greeks never adopted Solon's wise counsel, the Romans did. Based on what they knew of Solon's laws, they created the 12 tables of the Roman law and, in effect, built a republic that limited government power and left the people alone. Since government was limited, the people were free to produce, with the understanding that they could keep the fruits of their labor. In time, Rome became wealthy and the envy of the world. In the midst of plenty, however, the Roman people forgot what freedom entailed. They forgot that the essence of freedom is the proper limitation of government. When government power grows, people freedom recedes. Once the Romans dropped their guard, power-seeking politicians began to exceed the powers granted them in the Roman constitution. Some learned that they could elect politicians who would use government power to take property from some and give it to others. Agriculture subsidies were introduced, followed by housing and welfare programs. Inevitably, taxes rose and controls over the private sector were imposed. Soon, a number of Rome's producers could no longer make ends meet, and they went on the dole. Productivity declined, shortages developed, and mobs began roaming the streets, demanding bread and circuses from the government. Many were induced to trade freedom for security. Eventually, the whole system came crashing down. They went from a republic to a democracy and ended up with an oligarchy under a progression of the Caesars. Thus, democracy itself is not a stable form of government. Instead, it is the gradual transition from limited government to the unlimited rule of an oligarchy. Knowing this, we as Americans are ultimately left with only two choices. We can keep our republic, as Franklin put it, or we will inevitably end up with an oligarchy, a tyranny of the elite.
Okay. So, any thoughts on that? Oh, sorry about that.
Secretary of Treasury. Deals with money.
Stop share.
There we go.
And then stop
Okay.
share.
Thank you.
Yep.
Obviously, the distance learning didn't teach me to Zoom properly. Sorry about that. So I actually showed this video to my students because we had a project on creating your own country. And so each student had to create their own country. It was a very fascinating discussions were had, fascinating time. And when I showed this video, I would say, metaphorically speaking, every student's head popped. And I had some students want to talk about this to me after class because they had no idea. And then they started making some connections to current events. And so that was powerful. And that's why I have a sign on my wall across my room, only the educated are free. So there you go.
Yeah, it when people understand that they can vote themselves property or benefits, bribing the politicians, and the politicians have for
Yep.
decades, generations,
Yep.
abused the law and have what I would say is lawlessness.
Yep.
They've given into a spirit of lawlessness, and they've learned that they can just do whatever they want. Up to and including, Representative Bierman in Minnesota, when I testified and told him that he's approving a bill out of committee that he knows is unconstitutional, and he doubled down and said, I don't care, I support this bill. And, I'm just dumbfounded that,
Lawlessness has been rewarded in politics.
Yeah, and you can break your oath to uphold the Constitution. And unfortunately, the ethics committee is run by Democrats in Minnesota, and so they're not going to bring a charge against their own.
And why aren't the sheriffs arresting these people?
I don't know.
I don't think the sheriffs even understand that they have the power to arrest these people. It is unlawful behavior. Why aren't the sheriffs upholding their oath to do that? That which is unpopular but necessary to save our republic. Why isn't that happening?
Yeah, why didn't that happen in the time of the Romans? That video succinctly discussed how, they set up what very similar to the Constitution, a
Yep.
limited republic.
Yep.
And eventually the people forgot where their blessing came from,
Right.
their creator, and following law. And then they lost it, and we need to get back to the basics of the Constitution and a rule of law.
Right.
When the government can't pass a law legislatively, but then a dictator governor just passes the same thing by edict.
And that's what confuses me as well is you have these legislators proposing new bills, okay, a new legislation. We need another bill for the unisex bathrooms. We need a bill like the Stop Woke Act. We need a bill. How about we stop the madness of more and more amendments, laws, legislation, and go back to our Constitution? Because I really firmly believe if we went that route of auditing our Constitution, it would solve the problems that we're seeing today.
It would create a culture and an environment of freedom that people would say, well, we can't have people being free like that.
People don't know. I don't think people know how to be free. When Yeonmi Park, I'm butchering her name and I don't mean to, she had spoken in a podcast about leaving North Korea and coming to America, and how she was dumbfounded and almost a little bit begrudging about the freedom she had because she did not know what to do with it. And she said she felt this anxiety of having freedom because she was so used to being told what she could and couldn't do. And there were all these parameters around her behavior, parameters around her thought, parameters around her, what she could buy, around everything, a facet of her life, that when she came here to this country, she noticed like, oh, I've got more freedom. But she also noticed when she went to university, I believe it was Columbia University, what they were teaching was the very thing she had left, which was that collectivist dictatorship ideology that was being foisted upon her. She was being brainwashed back into that mindset that she had escaped. And she said she had these fears for this country. And I posit that we're already here. We already have thought police. I'm banned from Facebook for 30 days because I dared had an opinion contrary to the oligarchy, contrary to the regime. This is very dangerous. And I know, what is it going to take? And I apologize, yet don't apologize for getting passionate about this, but what is it going to take? Do we need to get to Venezuela? Do we need to get to the point of Sri Lanka? Do we need to get to the point of having the Mexican cartels in this country? What does it take?
How about Armageddon?
Is that what it's going to take for people to actually? Where are the hard ass heroes? Where are the men? Where are the mothers? Where are the freedom thinking, liberty minded children of our Heavenly Father standing up, getting stoned, getting berated? Where are they?
We're being censored.
Well, yeah, that too.
And attacked in popular culture. And if you look at sticking to our Constitution, we don't have to go very far back to see a complete abuse and an outright malfeasance of lawlessness with Waltz and his government in his COVID-19 response.
Oh my goodness! And then making excuses for the rioting.
And not dealing with that. And with the COVID-19 thing, in chapter 12 of Minnesota statutes is what we would call invalid law or an unconstitutional law, because it says that the legislature can delegate its power to the governor and he can dictate law during an emergency, which is unconstitutional.
Right.
You can't do that.
And that's what an audit does. And I mentioned this in our last town hall meeting. I met with a House representative who sent an email. I met with the House representative speaking about auditing the federal government and I submitted, why can't you just bring up auditing the Minnesota Constitution? Like omnibus bills, are those constitutional in our state? No, they're unconstitutional. And he schooled me on that. And he said, well, the way we got around that is they decided, well, if the title is one subject, then they can include multiple subjects underneath that. As long as it's
No.
couched within one title, then it's no longer considered an omnibus bill, even though it is an omnibus bill. So I said, why can't we just audit? Let's start by example, by auditing. Let Minnesota lead the way, and let's audit itself, its own
Yeah,
charter,
we would
its
audit
own
our own
constitution.
constitution.
Yeah, let's audit
And-
that. Let's start there. Let's start there. And
But-
he actually sent an email, and I got a copy or a forwarded response to that email about auditing. How do we audit our own state constitution, our own state charter? And that response that was forwarded to me that he got, and I know the name and I saved it and I have it, stated, if we ever did something like this, we could never let the public know. That is ridiculously disgusting. That's disgusting. They serve us.
Well, it's disgusting. Even
What do
in,
you have to hide?
even in your point about the omnibus bill, our Constitution, the law says that you have to introduce one topic at a time. And the fact that they gaslight and just say, well, gaslighting is lying and is lawlessness.
Yes.
And when the Governor Walz says, oh, well, thank you, Minnesotans, for your, how did he say it? Just give me a second. He said,
Sure.
Thank you for your sacrifice. To
It's not a
keep our
sacrifice if
state-"
I'm not willing to give it to you. It was taken
Yeah,
from me.
if it's taken, if you're forced out of your business by the government unlawfully, and then the government comes in and dictates rental agreements unlawfully, those aren't
Yep.
sacrifices. That
Yep.
is tyranny. You're gaslighting.
Yep.
And
It's
so an
narcissistic
audit-
abuse.
An audit against those behaviors, suing in the courts, but then when the courts are going along with it and throw
Yep.
it out and don't
It's
want to hear it.
corruption. And
It's
that's why we need an audit. An audit. Just
And-
audit it.
And what is the outcome of an audit if you
Draining the
find,
swamp. The outcome is draining the swamp and getting rid of the bad actors.
yeah, and
Yep.
so I'm going to wrap it up here, and we
Sure.
have to have another town hall. So we do the audit, then what is of course going to be the question. And what we're proposing is that we take this audit to the counties, just like the states make up the federal government, the
Mhm.
counties make up the state government. We bring the audit
Yep.
results to the counties, and the counties decide what they're going to do. I would throw out there that you say, using the 14th Amendment of the United States, when someone breaks their oath to uphold the Constitution, they're disqualified
Yep.
from running for office or ever
Absolutely.
holding a public office again.
Absolutely.
Waltz and Ellison and people would be surprised.
Both sides of the aisle. This isn't
Well,
both sides of the aisle. Both
I was
sides
about
are
to say,
playing this
people would be
game.
surprised how many Republicans knew that what Waltz was doing was unconstitutional,
But wouldn't
but
call
they
him
chose
on.
not to do anything.
Because they had to run for Congress soon, or they had to run for another.
And so
career
they had
move.
done other things to promote lawlessness.
Yep.
And so our takeaway with the Republic Review is that we bring it back to the counties. The counties have their own convention, and then they decide based on their power, they can remove the governor from the office.
Yep.
They can
A sheriff can
disqualify-
arrest the governor.
Yeah,
The sheriffs need to understand the capacity of the powers
the
that they
sheriffs
have.
can remove their representatives if they find that their representatives have not upheld to their oath. They
Yep.
can remove them or arrest them and prevent them from representing, and then the counties or the areas can have another vote. I mean,
Yep.
there's common law stuff that can be happen, and
Yep.
that's what needs to be fleshed out. And it requires the will of the people to
Yep.
see the lawlessness, to see how they're corrupt men and women in
Yep.
our government doing unlawful things,
And
acting
it's the
like
very people that you think you trust, because I've spoken with these politicians and these wannabe politicians that will talk a good talk about freedom and liberty, and they have succumbed to making concessions and
but you
compromising
look
that
at
which
their
they should not.
action.
Yep.
You look at their actions and see if they're upholding the Constitution and the rule of law. We
Right.
are a republic. We are under a rule of law. We are not an
Oligarchy.
oligarchy, thank you, or a democracy. And the people have to choose to stand up and do something about it.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where we're at. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
I just hope that people are encouraged and empowered and have the wherewithal and the strength that God can give them to stand up for their own individual rights. I have 6 children, 2 grandchildren, and I will be damned, and I will fight with all of my might and every sinew of my body for their freedom, for their liberty, and for mine. We cannot grow into the full measure of our Creator's creation in us without liberty and freedom.
Amen. So thank you, Andrea
Thank you.
Cuellar. And that wraps up our 3rd town hall. And please sign up to on our website, constitutionpartymn.com, for our newsletter. Also, you'll get any notices of our next town hall schedules. Check out our website under events. That's where we'll be publishing them. So thank you, everyone, and
Thank
God
you.
bless.
God bless. Thank you.